Now, before we deal with the latter two phases, let's continue with the first and point out the remains of those original African or certainly Africoid populations in Asia. For example, or not just Asia, but Australian islands of the Pacific as well. For example, again, based on my recent travels, and I've been blessed to travel virtually all over the world in the last 2 years or so. In Australia, I was able to interview many brothers and sisters, and I would make these points about humanity beginning in Africa based on studies of DNA, and they would listen politely and not say a word. And then later that night, in a more social atmosphere, they would come to me and say, "Brother Ranoko, we like you. And we find what you're saying to be very interesting. However, we don't agree with it. We believe that humanity began in Australia, that African people didn't come from Africa, that African people came from Australia, that we believe Australia is the center of the universe, and that this whole area here was a gigantic landmass that connected Australia with Africa, and that African people came from here and ultimately migrated into Africa. In fact, as a side note, it might be interesting to say from their perspective that they believe that all humanity has an ancient Australian ancestry. They say, for example, that we have all the features common to humanity, that we have straight hair, and the Europeans and Asians have straight hair, that we have black skin, and that African people and Pacific Islanders had black skin. So therefore, it's logical for them to assume that humanity began in Australia. The people I'm talking about are traditionally known as Australian Aborigines. And this is a term which many of them find offensive. They don't mind being called Aboriginal, but the word